A millionaire's wife was attacked by a stranger, but was fortunately saved by a homeless boy. It was not until the second ambush that she was shocked to see that the man sitting in the car directing the kidnapping was... The night was restless, weighed down by the thick scent of damp asphalt and the distant hum of traffic. The city, still alive in its own relentless rhythm, pulsed with neon signs flickering against the slick pavement, their reflections stretching like phantom fingers across the street. A faint drizzle had begun, the kind that never quite turned into a downpour, but left a chill in the air, a warning of the storm that loomed on the horizon. Laura Crawford adjusted the silk shawl draped over her shoulders, her heels clicking against the sidewalk as she walked toward the parking lot. The charity event had run late, and though the evening had been fulfilling, filled with warm exchanges, handshakes, and the glow of gratitude from the shelter's residents, there was an unsettling emptiness in the streets now. She had felt it 2 blocks ago, a quiet pressure at her back, the prickling awareness that comes when one is being watched. Another set of footsteps, light, deliberate, not hurried, but not casual either. She kept walking, her pulse quickening. Rationality told her it could be anyone, but instinct tightened her grip on her clutch. She turned a corner sharply, hoping to shake the feeling, but as she passed an alley, shadows moved where there should have been none. A hand shot out. She barely had time to gasp before a rough grip latched onto her arm, yanking her off balance. "Keep quiet, lady," a voice rasped near her ear. "Make this easy for yourself." Laura's breath caught in her throat as another figure emerged, then another. The alley swallowed them whole, its darkness thick, concealing. "What do you want?" she managed, her voice controlled despite the panic clawing at her chest. "Just a little trip," the first man sneered, tightening his hold. "Someone wants to have a chat with you." Laura struggled, twisting in his grip, but a second man blocked her way. The realization hit her like ice down her spine. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mugging. They had been waiting for her. Then, chaos. A loud clatter as something toppled nearby, followed by the blur of a figure darting past. "Hey!" One of the men turned, but before he could react, a small frame, fast, wiry, rushed in and struck him hard in the side with what looked like a piece of broken pipe. The man cursed, doubling over. "Run, lady!" The voice was young, urgent. Laura didn't think. She just moved. The boy, no older than 11 or 12, was already sprinting ahead, weaving through the narrow alleyway, like he had done this 100 times before. Laura forced her feet to follow, her breath coming in quick gasps, the sound of pounding footsteps behind them closing in. "Faster!" the boy shouted over his shoulder. Laura's chest burned, her dress tangling around her legs, but she pushed forward. They burst out onto the main street, the glare of streetlights momentarily blinding. Car horns blared, tires screeched. The men hesitated. Too much exposure, too many eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chase ended. The boy pulled her into the shelter of a recessed doorway, pressing his back against the cold bricks, chest heaving. Laura braced her hands against her knees, gulping air. "Who? What?" She swallowed, looking at him. He was small, too small for the kind of courage he had just displayed, his frame swallowed by an oversized hoodie, his face sharp with hunger and wariness. "You're welcome," he muttered, tucking the pipe into his waistband. She straightened, running a shaking hand through her hair. You saved me." The boy scoffed. "Didn't do it for you. Just don't like creeps messing up my street." She studied him in the flickering light. Too young to be this hardened. Too calm after what had just happened. "Where are your parents?" A dry laugh. "Lady, you think kids like me got parents?" Her stomach twisted. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Lucas." The rain, which had been a mere drizzle, suddenly thickened, drops pattering against the pavement, soaking into his already worn clothes. "Lucas," she repeated, watching the way he shifted. already preparing to disappear into the city's folds. Lightning cracked in the distance. A storm was coming. She exhaled. "Come with me." Lucas looked up, suspicion flaring in his eyes. "What? You can't stay out here, not in this storm." His brows furrowed. "You some kind of rich lady, huh? Think you can just pick up strays?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced up at the sky, feeling the electricity in the air, the way the wind had shifted. She wasn't going to let him walk away into that. "One night. That's all," she said. "You saved me. Let me return the favor." Lucas hesitated, glancing at the rain now coming down in thick sheets. He could refuse. He had done just fine on his own before. But as another roll of thunder echoed through the streets, he sighed and shoved his hands into his pockets. "One night," he muttered. Laura nodded. "One night." But neither of them knew, as they disappeared into the misty streets, that fate had already decided otherwise. The rain had turned into a steady hum, drumming softly against the large windows of the Crawford estate. Beyond the sprawling gardens, the city lights flickered through the mist like distant beacons. But inside, the warmth of the grand foyer held a different kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Nathan Crawford stood near the staircase, his tie slightly loosened from the long day, a glass of scotch in his hand, the amber liquid catching the chandelier's glow. He looked up at the clock on the wall, thinking to himself that Laura's charity event ended really late today. It was starting to rain, and she was coming home so late, making him uneasy. Nathan had been about to retire to his study, to pick up the phone and call his wife when the heavy front doors creaked open, revealing Laura, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her face, her expression unreadable. And behind her, a boy. Nathan's gaze settled on the stranger, his sharp instincts cataloguing details within seconds. The oversized hoodie, the wary eyes, the way the boy's fingers twitched as if resisting the urge to bolt. A street kid, a drenched, half-starved stray, standing on his imported Persian rug. "Laura?" Nathan's voice was even, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. "Mind telling me what's going on?" She exhaled, placing a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder, though the boy barely acknowledged it. "This is Lucas. He helped me tonight." Nathan's brow inched upward as he glanced at the boy again. Lucas shifted under his scrutiny, but held his ground, jaw clenched, his stance defiant, despite his obvious exhaustion. "He helped you?" Nathan repeated, setting his glass down on the side table. "And now he's here?" Laura brushed damp strands of hair from her face, stepping forward. "I was attacked." Nathan's fingers curled subtly, the only sign of emotion he allowed to slip through. She continued, voice steadier now. "A group of men tried to grab me. Lucas distracted them. She hesitated, knowing how absurd it might sound, how unlikely. "He saved me, Nathan." Nathan inhaled slowly. The air shifted between them, thick with unspoken concern. His gaze flickered to Lucas again. The boy remained silent, his posture guarded, but something in his eyes, a quiet storm of distrust and weariness, made Nathan pause. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, who had been watching from the hallway, finally stepped forward with practiced grace. In her hands was a folded towel, neatly placed over her arm. She extended it toward the boy. Lucas hesitated. It was almost imperceptible, the way his fingers hovered before grasping the fabric, the way his eyes darted to her face, searching for something he didn't quite believe in yet. Kindness. Nathan noticed. He stepped forward, stopping a few feet away. "You have a place to go?" Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the rain-streaked windows, as if the streets outside might call him back at any moment. Then, finally, he muttered, "I'm fine." Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. The way Lucas said it, without conviction, without expectation, told him everything he needed to know. Laura sighed. "Nathan, just for tonight." A pause. Then his jaw tightened slightly, but he gave a small nod. "Fine. One night." Lucas didn't react much, just shifted his weight and looked toward the wide staircase, already calculating the quickest way out if needed. Mrs. Holloway guided him upstairs while Laura lingered, her gaze still locked with Nathan's. "Do you really think this is wise?" he asked, his voice quieter now that the boy was gone. Laura's expression softened, but her words were firm. "I think we owe him at least this much." Nathan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He didn't like unexpected variables, didn't like bringing the unknown into their controlled, calculated life. But he trusted Laura, and she wasn't the type to let go of something once she'd decided on it. So, for tonight, the boy would stay. Upstairs, in the guest room. The room was too quiet. Lucas sat on the edge of the bed staring at the walls. Too pristine, too perfect. The sheets beneath his fingertips felt foreign, as if he might sink into them and disappear. For years, he had curled up under bridges, in alleyways, in stairwells where the city's heartbeat was constant, where the hum of danger never truly faded. Here, in this strange silence, he felt more alone than he ever had on the streets. A lamp flickered as the storm outside rumbled on. Lucas lay back stiffly, staring at the ceiling, telling himself he wouldn't sleep. That coming morning, he'd be out of here. But exhaustion was a cruel thing, and despite himself, despite every instinct screaming at him to stay alert, his eyes drifted shut. For the first time in years, he slept in a bed. The smell of bacon and fresh bread drifted through the house, winding its way up the grand staircase and slipping beneath the door of the guest room. Lucas stirred, his body slow to wake, instinctively curling tighter against the blanket, before the unfamiliar scent pulled him fully into consciousness. His stomach twisted, a dull, aching hunger gnawing at him, a sensation he knew all too well. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The warmth, the softness of the bed, the distant muffled sounds of clinking dishes and quiet morning conversation. None of it belonged to him. Then it hit him. The house, the Crawfords. Last night. Lucas sat up fast, heart hammering. The walls of the room were too pristine, the sheets too clean, and for a split second, he wondered if the past 12 hours had been a dream. But the slight dampness in his clothes, the subtle scent of rain still lingering on his skin, and the faint trace of an unfamiliar perfume, Laura's perfume, told him otherwise. Downstairs, Laura stood in the kitchen, stirring cream into her coffee, her expression light as she spoke with Mrs. Holloway. The older woman moved with practiced efficiency, plating food with the quiet competence of someone who had worked in the estate for years. "Your husband was up early," she remarked, handing Laura a plate of toast. Laura hummed, taking a slow sip. "That's not unusual, but I think last night unsettled him more than he let on." Mrs. Holloway glanced toward the staircase. "And the boy?" Laura's lips curved slightly. "Still asleep, I assume. He had a long night." As if on cue, a pair of hesitant footsteps made their way down the stairs. Laura turned just as Lucas appeared in the doorway, his stance half reluctant, half determined. His hoodie was slightly rumpled, his hair still damp in places, but his eyes, guarded, scanning the room in quick, calculated sweeps, revealed more than anything else. He was ready to leave. Before Lucas could speak, Nathan lowered the newspaper, setting it aside with deliberate slowness. "What's his plan after breakfast?" The words landed heavily in the space between them. Lucas, sensing the shift in the air, glanced toward the front door, his shoulders stiffening. "I should go." His voice was neutral, but there was something carefully measured in the way he said it. Like a soldier declaring a retreat before the battle had truly begun. Laura sighed, setting down her coffee. "You just got here." Lucas shrugged, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Didn't plan on staying. Nathan exhaled through his nose, watching the exchange. He didn't argue, but he didn't encourage the boy to leave either. He simply observed, waiting. Laura, however, wasn't having it. "You haven't even eaten," she pointed out, nodding toward the breakfast table. Lucas hesitated, his gaze flickering to the plates of eggs, toast, and bacon. His stomach clenched painfully, but he forced himself to shrug like it didn't matter. Nathan, still unreadable, finally spoke again. "Eat first," he said, turning back to the newspaper. "Decide after." Lucas blinked, thrown off by the casual command. He looked at Laura, then at Mrs. Holloway, who was already pulling out a chair for him. It was the first time someone had ever told him to sit down and eat without asking for anything in return. Slowly, as if testing the weight of the moment, Lucas moved toward the table. The morning passed quietly, but deliberately. Lucas trailed behind Laura for most of it, not entirely sure why he hadn't left yet. Maybe it was the breakfast, or the warmth of the house, or the fact that, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't immediately being pushed back into the cold. They visited a local shelter, the same one where Laura had spent her evening before the attack. It was smaller than he expected. Nothing fancy, nothing grand, but full of movement and voices, of people who didn't seem invisible here. Lucas watched as Laura spoke with the staff, her presence familiar and comfortable, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. She didn't act like someone who was just there to do a good deed. She actually knew these people. A woman named Ms. Reyes, dressed in a faded cardigan, smiled warmly as she spotted Laura. "You're back early," she noted, glancing at Lucas. "And with company?" Laura gave a small laugh. "Something like that." Ms. Reyes studied Lucas for a moment, eyes perceptive but kind. "Well, kid, welcome. You sticking around for the day?" Lucas shifted. "Guess so." And just like that, he was handed a box of supplies and told to help. He spent the next few hours handing out packages, carrying bags, moving furniture, listening to the quiet murmurs of gratitude from people who looked a lot like the ones he used to run with. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just passing through. That evening, Lucas sat at the dining table, fork in hand, staring at the meal before him. The house was dimly lit, soft light spilling from the chandeliers, casting long shadows over the polished wood. Nathan was across from him, reading something on his phone. Laura was beside him, cutting into her food, occasionally glancing at him as if to check that he was still there. The conversation was minimal, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Lucas chewed slowly, each bite unfamiliar. He was eating at a real table, with real plates, in a house where no one was trying to steal his food the second he looked away. He didn't know what to do with that, so he just kept eating, and for the first time in a long time, no one told him to leave. A light drizzle hung in the air the next morning, the sky still painted in muted shades of grey as the city slowly came to life beyond the Crawford estate. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen contrasted sharply with the chill outside. The faint hum of classical music played from a speaker in the corner, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and buttered toast lingering in the air. Lucas, still adjusting to the house's quiet rhythm, moved carefully, as though any sudden motion might remind everyone that he didn't belong. Days had passed. He hadn't left. He kept telling himself it was temporary, that he was only staying because Laura hadn't asked him to leave yet. But if that were true, why did he find himself instinctively helping around the house? Why did he follow the cook into the kitchen without being asked, handing her the flour before she even reached for it? Mrs. Holloway had noticed first. "You're quick," she mused one afternoon as Lucas helped unload groceries. Lucas only shrugged, used to doing things fast. "You don't have to," she said, eyeing him with something close to understanding. "Not here." But old habits were hard to break. The cook, a sturdy woman named Evelyn, was the first to warm up to him. She snuck him extra pieces of shortbread, made sure there was always something for him in the kitchen, and even let him taste test sauces when Nathan wasn't around to raise an eyebrow. The gardener, Mr. Finch, was another. The old man, who spent most of his days tending to the sprawling grounds, let Lucas trail behind him, teaching him how to prune the roses without damaging the stems, how to tell which soil was best, and the names of flowers Lucas had never cared about before. "You're good with your hands," Finch noted one morning, watching as Lucas carefully repotted a plant. Lucas only nodded, brushing dirt from his palms. He wasn't sure what to say to that. The house, which had felt foreign and oversized, was slowly becoming familiar in ways that unnerved him. And then Nathan returned. It was late afternoon when the front door swung open, and the sound of Nathan's sharp footsteps filled the foyer. He had been away on business for 3 days, and Lucas had almost forgotten how his presence shifted the air of the house. Lucas had been in the kitchen, helping Laura prepare dinner, when he heard the deep murmur of Nathan's voice from the hallway. A moment later, Nathan stepped into the room. He was still dressed in his suit, his tie loosened, but his posture unreadable as his gaze landed on Lucas standing beside his wife at the counter. Lucas could feel the weight of his stare, but he didn't shrink away. Nathan crossed the room, his movements slow but deliberate, and leaned against the counter. His eyes flickered between Laura and Lucas, then back again. "He's still here," Nathan observed. His voice was calm and measured, but there was something beneath it, not annoyance, but curiosity. Laura met his gaze without hesitation. "And I want him to stay." Silence stretched between them. Lucas didn't move. Nathan exhaled, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck before glancing at the food spread out on the counter. Fresh pasta, chopped herbs, slices of bread waiting to be toasted. "You're cooking?" he asked, his attention shifting briefly to Lucas. Lucas gripped the knife a little tighter, nodding. "Helping." Nathan's expression was unreadable. Then, after a beat, he simply said, "All right." Lucas blinked. He had expected more resistance, maybe a quiet argument between husband and wife once he left the room. But Nathan just grabbed a glass from the cabinet, poured himself water, and leaned against the kitchen island like it was just another evening. Like Lucas being here wasn't something strange anymore. That night, as they sat at the dining table, Lucas ate in quiet contemplation. Nathan, though initially silent, had eventually asked him a question about the food, a simple one, about whether the sauce was too thick. It wasn't a direct invitation into conversation, but it was something. Laura, as always, was the bridge between them, seamlessly filling the gaps with her light conversation, occasionally glancing at Nathan like she was making sure he was really okay with this. Lucas didn't speak much, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he had to. And when dinner ended, and Nathan didn't remind him that this was temporary, something unfamiliar settled in Lucas's chest. Hope, flickering, small. But there, the city stirred beneath the soft haze of morning, the first tendrils of sunlight stretching over the rooftops. Inside the Crawford estate, the day unfolded in a slow, unhurried rhythm, the kind that still felt foreign to Lucas, who had spent most of his life in the constant motion of the streets. He had started moving before dawn, slipping downstairs without much thought, drawn by the quiet hum of the house before it fully woke. It had become a habit, helping Mrs. Holloway set the table, fetching ingredients for Evelyn in the kitchen, trailing after Mr. Finch in the garden. No one had asked him to, but no one had stopped him either. And now, as he stood by the counter, peeling apples with the careful precision of someone used to working with their hands, he could feel Laura watching him. "You don't have to help all the time, you know," she said lightly, cradling her coffee mug. Lucas shrugged, keeping his eyes on the fruit. "Don't mind it." Laura's lips quirked, as if she had expected that answer. She didn't push further, only continued sipping her coffee. There was no pressure here, no expectation. Just an unspoken understanding. Days passed. Lucas had fallen into step with Laura's routine, moving through her world with the kind of quiet presence that felt more natural than planned. He carried shopping bags, handed out supplies at the shelter, and walked beside her when she visited places that Nathan never seemed to go, small community centers, old bookstores, cafes where the owners greeted her like an old friend. It was different from what he had expected, not just charity, but connection. She didn't talk at people. She listened. She knew the names of the old woman who ran the bakery on 12th Street, the man who sold flowers outside the train station, the kid behind the counter at the convenience store who always packed her change in neat little envelopes. Lucas didn't realize how much he had been paying attention until one afternoon, when they were walking back from the farmer's market. "You forgot the tomatoes," he muttered, shifting the bag in his arms. Laura blinked, then laughed. "I did, didn't I?" She glanced at him, something amused, and maybe a little proud, flickering in her expression. Lucas looked away, feigning indifference. But the next time they went shopping, she let him hold the list. Nathan, for the most part, remained a quiet observer. He never commented when Lucas poured his coffee without being asked, or when he lingered in the study, thumbing through the old books on the shelves. He didn't say anything when he found Lucas in the kitchen late at night, helping Evelyn prep ingredients for the next day's meals. But Lucas could feel his presence, always watching. Not in suspicion, not anymore, but in something else, something unreadable. Then, one afternoon, it happened. They had been walking through the garden, Laura moving at her usual unhurried pace. Lucas, a few steps behind, was listening to her talk about a book she had been meaning to reread, something about second chances and missed moments. Then, without warning, she stumbled. It wasn't dramatic, just a sudden, unexpected misstep. But Lucas reacted without thinking. His hand shot out, steadying her before she could fall, fingers curling instinctively around her wrist. Laura inhaled sharply, blinking in surprise. Before she could finish, another set of hands was there. Nathan. He had moved fast, too fast for someone who had been standing across the yard just moments before. His grip on Laura's arm was firm, steady, but his expression had shifted. Something tense, concerned, flickering in his usually composed features. Laura smiled, squeezing his hand before he could say anything. "I'm fine." Nathan's gaze didn't leave her. Lucas stepped back, clearing his throat, suddenly aware of how easily Nathan had moved past him, how his first instinct had been to catch her himself. Then Laura exhaled, rubbing a hand over her temple. "Maybe I should sit for a minute." She was pale. Lucas noticed it first. Nathan noticed it second, and by the time she had agreed to rest, the unease in the air had thickened. The doctor came later that evening. Lucas lingered in the hallway, listening to the quiet hum of conversation from behind the closed doors. Mrs. Holloway passed by, pausing briefly when she saw him. She didn't send him away, just gave him a look that told him he wasn't the only one waiting. When the door finally opened, Laura was smiling, and Nathan looked shaken in a way Lucas had never seen before. "We're having a baby," Laura announced. It took a second for the words to land. Lucas stared at her, then at Nathan, then back again. And then, before he could stop himself, he grinned. A real grin, wide and unguarded. That's good," he said, breathless. "That's really good." He wasn't sure why it mattered so much, but it did. And when Nathan finally turned to look at him, something in the man's expression softened. Not entirely, but just enough. For the first time, Nathan saw what Laura had seen from the beginning. Lucas fit, even if none of them had expected him to. The evening air hung heavy with the remnants of the afternoon sun, the sky painted in hues of deep purple and burnt orange as the last traces of daylight bled into the horizon. The city had settled into its usual rhythm, cars rolling lazily down streets, neon lights flickering on one by one, conversations spilling from open shop fronts. Laura and Lucas walked at a steady pace, their footsteps echoing faintly against the pavement. The orphanage visit had lasted longer than expected, filled with children's laughter, warm embraces, and quiet moments of understanding between those who had known loss. Lucas had spent most of the afternoon observing, hesitating at the edges, but by the time they were leaving, he had found himself in the middle of things, passing out books, fixing a broken latch, even letting a few of the younger kids tug at his sleeves without protest. "You don't talk much, do you?" A little girl with freckles and missing front teeth had asked him. Lucas had shrugged. "Not if I don't have to." She had nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Now, walking back toward where Nathan's car was supposed to pick them up, Lucas stole a glance at Laura. She looked peaceful, her hand absently resting against her stomach. "You're different here," he said after a moment. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Lucas hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know. Like you belong." She smiled at that, her fingers grazing the fabric of her dress. "Maybe I do." Lucas understood. Some places felt right, as if they had always been waiting for you. But then, the air shifted, a low rumble, tires rolling over asphalt. Lucas's back straightened instinctively. A van pulled up beside them, slow and deliberate. Laura faltered mid-step. The sound of the city faded into the background. The only thing Lucas could hear now was the quiet hum of the engine and the faint pulse in his own ears. He didn't move, but his body coiled like a wire pulled too tight. Something was wrong. Laura must have felt it too, because her grip on the grocery bag tightened just slightly. She started to step back, pulling Lucas with her. The van's doors slid open before she could react. Men spilled out, moving fast, too fast for this to be random. Lucas barely had time to register the blur of dark clothing, the dull gleam of metal at someone's hip, and the way they advanced with precise, practiced movements. Laura inhaled sharply. Her first instinct was not to run, not to fight, but to shield. One hand flew protectively over her stomach, the other reaching for Lucas. And then, her breath caught in her throat. Because inside the van, just beyond the shadows, through the slight tint of the window, she saw him. Nathan. She froze. For a split second, the entire world stilled. The face staring back at her was unmistakable. Sharp features, dark eyes, the hard-set expression she had seen countless times, the man she had trusted, the father of her unborn child. Nathan, sitting there, watching. Her mind screamed at her, telling her it wasn't possible, but her eyes refused to lie. Why? Why was he there? Why wasn't he stopping this? That single moment of hesitation cost her. A man lunged. Lucas saw it first. His body reacted before his mind could. He shoved himself in front of Laura, arms outstretched, a human shield between her and the oncoming threat. A heavy blow landed against his skull. The sound of impact was sickening, dull, and final. Lucas staggered, his vision exploding into white-hot bursts of light before everything tilted violently. His knees buckled, and before he could stop himself, he crumpled to the ground. Laura's scream split through the night. She dropped beside him, hands shaking as she reached for his motionless form. Her mind was frantic. Was he breathing? Was he conscious? Was he... She barely had time to process it before she looked up, wild-eyed, searching for the van, for the face that had shattered everything in a matter of seconds. But Nathan, if it was Nathan, was already gone. The doors slammed shut, tires screeched against pavement, and the van disappeared into the dark, swallowed by the city's endless sprawl. Laura gasped for breath, panic clawing at her throat. Lucas lay beside her, still, too still. Were you surprised by Nathan's appearance? If so, leave a comment banana in the comment section. Chaos swallowed the night. The street, once empty and quiet, was suddenly alive with movement. People rushed over, drawn by Laura's scream, their faces blurred by the mix of dim streetlights and raw panic. Someone was shouting for help. A man knelt beside Lucas, checking for a pulse. A woman pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes darting between the unconscious boy and Laura, who was sobbing, hands hovering over Lucas, but too afraid to touch him. "He's bleeding," someone muttered. A distant siren howled in the air, growing closer with every agonizing second. Laura couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Her entire body trembled as she clutched at Lucas's limp form, her own heart hammering as if trying to jump out of her chest and replace his failing one. "Stay with me," she whispered hoarsely, brushing his matted hair from his face. His skin was too cold, too pale. The ambulance arrived in a blur of flashing lights and sharp voices. Paramedics moved fast, lifting Lucas onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, placed a reassuring hand on Laura's shoulder. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" Laura shook her head violently. No, but he saved me. He took the hit. I don't know how bad it is. We'll take care of him," the paramedic promised, but Laura could see the concern in her eyes. She climbed into the ambulance without thinking. She wasn't leaving Lucas. Not for a second. As the doors slammed shut behind her, Laura forced herself to push the terror down, to focus on the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, the rise and fall of Lucas's chest, no matter how shallow it seemed. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image that haunted her. Nathan, sitting in that van, watching. The hospital waiting room was unbearably bright. The sharp scent of antiseptic clung to the air, sterile and suffocating. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold glow casting elongated shadows against the pale hospital walls. The waiting room was nearly empty, save for the occasional nurse passing through and the distant murmur of hushed conversations from down the hall. Laura sat on the edge of the chair, her knuckles white as she clenched the fabric of her dress in her fists. Her heart was still pounding, her ears still ringing from the chaos of the night. Lucas was still unconscious. That thought alone sent another wave of nausea rolling through her. Her hands trembled as she wiped at the dried tear streaks on her cheeks. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, staring at the double doors leading to the emergency wing. Time felt suspended, stretched impossibly thin between the moment Lucas hit the ground and the moment the doctors whisked him away. The doors swung open. Laura shot to her feet at the sight of Nathan, breathless, disheveled, his tie undone, his hair slightly out of place, as if he had been running. His eyes searched the room frantically before they landed on her. Relief flickered across his face. "Laura!" The slap came before she even realized she had moved. The sound of it cracked through the waiting room, sharp and sudden, freezing everything in place. Nathan's head snapped to the side, his jaw tightening. A deep silence settled between them. "You tried to kill me." Her voice was low, shaking, filled with something raw and venomous, hurt, fury, betrayal. Nathan blinked, his expression shifting from shock to confusion. His breath hitched slightly, as if he had just been struck by something far worse than the slap itself. "What?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. Laura's nails dug into her palms. "Don't lie to me," she spat. "I saw you, in that van." Nathan's brows furrowed, and then, for the first time in years, his composure cracked. "What the hell are you talking about?" She let out a hollow laugh, but it came out more like a sob. "Don't do that. Don't act like you don't know." Nathan stepped closer, hands raised slightly, as if approaching a wild animal on the verge of breaking apart. "Laura, I wasn't there. I was at work." She took a sharp step back. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying." His voice rose now, a rare slip in control. "Why would I ever?" Laura sucked in a breath, shaking her head. The image of his face, cold, distant, watching her from the back seat of that van, was burned into her skull. "I saw you," she whispered, quieter now, as if saying it again would make the pieces fit together. Make it make sense. Nathan stared at her, something flickering behind his eyes, something that almost looked like fear. "Laura," he said, his voice controlled again, quieter this time. Steady. "I was at the office all day. Ask my assistant, ask my team. They'll tell you. I never left." She faltered. "No," she whispered. "No, But she had seen him. She was sure she had seen him, wasn't she? Her breath came in uneven gasps, her mind reeling as doubt, a thin, treacherous sliver of doubt, began to creep in. Nathan reached for her hand, and she flinched. His expression twisted briefly before he pulled back. "I would never hurt you," he said, voice low, almost desperate now. "Never." Laura wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But the image of his face in that van, unfeeling, detached, watching as men lunged for her as Lucas collapsed to the ground, refused to let her go. So she said nothing. And in the silence, Nathan realized something. For the first time since he had met her, since he had fallen in love with her, Laura was afraid of him. Nathan had always considered himself a man of logic, someone who operated with calculated decisions rather than impulsive emotion. But as he stood in that too-bright hospital hallway, watching the way Laura refused to meet his gaze, feeling the phantom sting of her slap still burning on his cheek, he realized that nothing in his life had ever prepared him for this, for the way she looked at him now, with fear. The weight of her accusation sat between them, thick and suffocating. She thought he had tried to kill her, and he had no way to prove otherwise. Nathan exhaled slowly, forcing his mind into focus. If there was one thing he knew, one thing he had always known, it was that he had never, would never, hurt Laura. But someone had. Someone with his face. A chilling sensation crept down his spine, old memories stirring from the depths of his mind. There was only one explanation. He closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them, meeting Laura's gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and steady. "There's something I need to tell you." They sat in the hospital's empty lounge, the soft murmur of nurses in the background. Laura sat across from him, arms crossed tightly, her body still wound with tension. Nathan rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor for a moment before speaking. "I have a brother." Laura flinched slightly, as if the words themselves had weight. "What?" Nathan inhaled deeply. "A twin. His name is Derek." Silence. The words hung between them, heavy and sharp, filling in the gaps where confusion had settled. Laura's eyes narrowed, her breath unsteady. "You—" She shook her head, her fingers gripping the edge of her coat. "You never told me you had a brother." Nathan lifted his gaze. "Because he doesn't exist anymore. Not to me." Laura said nothing, her expression unreadable. Nathan ran a hand over his face, the memories surfacing like ghosts long buried. "Derek and I," he exhaled, forcing the words out. "We were nothing alike. Even when we were kids, he always had this darkness in him. Reckless, entitled, dangerous." He hesitated before continuing. "My father knew it too. That's why, even though Derek was the oldest, by only a few minutes, he chose me as his successor instead. He cut Derek out, disowned him completely." Laura's breath hitched slightly. Nathan's voice hardened. "When my father died, I inherited everything. Derek got nothing. My father didn't want to consider him his son. He didn't want to admit that he raised a cruel and despotic person. He disappeared after that. I never looked for him, never thought he'd come back." His eyes flickered to Laura, his jaw tightening. "But he has." Laura's hands clenched into fists. "And you think it was him, in the van?" Nathan nodded slowly. "It makes sense. If you saw someone who looked exactly like me—" He exhaled, his voice dark. "Then it had to be Derek." A slow, suffocating dread settled over the room. Laura sat motionless, staring at Nathan as if seeing him for the first time. The anger she had clung to for the past few hours wavered, replaced by something colder, sharper. "Nathan," she said quietly, carefully. "If that was Derek—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Nathan straightened. "Then he's after you." Laura swallowed, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed a hand over her stomach, over their child. Nathan saw the motion. His body tensed. "He wants to destroy me," he said, his voice controlled but dangerous now. "And he knows the best way to do that is through you. Through their family." A sick realization hit him. Derek had waited years to strike. He had planned this, watched from the shadows, studying their lives. And Nathan had never seen it coming. His hands curled into fists. That wouldn't happen again. "I'll find him," Nathan said darkly, standing. "And when I do, he won't get another chance to hurt you." Laura looked up at him, searching his face, and for the first time since the attack, she nodded. But the fear didn't leave her eyes, because they both knew Derek wasn't done yet. The office was dimly lit, the only glow coming from the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nathan sat at his desk, his fingers drumming against the mahogany surface, his mind turning over the information in front of him. The detective's report had arrived an hour ago, a neatly compiled file filled with addresses, financial transactions, and surveillance photos of a man who shouldn't exist anymore. Derek. His brother had resurfaced like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Nathan flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. Derek had been careful, staying off the grid for years, but not careful enough. The detective had tracked him to a warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place used for smuggling, money laundering, things Nathan had long left behind. With a steady breath, he reached for his phone. It rang twice before a voice answered. "You finally found me." Nathan's grip on the receiver tightened. "Meet me." A pause. Then a dark chuckle. "Missed me, brother." Nathan's voice was steel. "Tomorrow, midnight, just us." Derek exhaled, amused. "See you soon." The line went dead. Nathan placed the phone down, his expression unreadable. Tomorrow, it would end, one way or another. The warehouse smelled of rust and damp cement, its towering metal beams casting jagged shadows under the dim industrial lights. The air inside was thick, too still, too expectant, like something waiting to snap. Nathan stepped forward, his shoes echoing against the concrete. Ahead of him stood Derek, his brother, his mirror image. Except, not quite. Derek's face bore the same sharp angles, the same piercing eyes, the same jawline that had made people mistake them for one another as children. But there was something in the way he carried himself, a looseness to his stance, a reckless grin curling at the edges of his mouth. Nathan had always been in control. Derek had always been chaos. And tonight, chaos had called him here. Nathan kept his expression cold. He did not let his emotions show, even as he took in the sight of his brother for the first time in over a decade. "You've been busy," Nathan said finally. His voice was even, calculated. He refused to give Derek the satisfaction of his anger. Derek laughed, a low, unhurried sound, filled with amusement and something darker beneath it. "You have no idea," Derek murmured, stepping forward, his boots scuffing against the ground. Around him, figures moved in the shadows, hired thugs, muscle, men who didn't ask questions as long as they were paid. Nathan's gaze flicked over them once, then returned to his brother. "Tell me," Nathan said, his voice cold steel. "Why now? Why come back after all these years?" Derek's eyes glinted with something sharp, something almost feral. "Because you took everything from me," he said simply, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. Nathan's jaw tightened. "I didn't take anything. You lost it." That grin again. Mocking. Cruel. Is that what you tell yourself? That I lost? That our dear father just happened to choose you, and I just happened to be left in the dirt? Derek's voice hardened, his amusement fading. You didn't win, Nathan. You were handed everything. And what did I get? He took another step forward. Nathan didn't move. I got nothing, Derek seethed. No inheritance, no name, no place, no family. His lips curled. You didn't even come looking for me, did you? Nathan's voice remained even. You made your choices. Derek let out a low breath, shaking his head. And now, I'm making new ones. Nathan's eyes narrowed. The meaning wasn't lost on him. You tried to kill my wife, he said quietly, dangerously. Derek's grin returned. Twice. He tilted his head. And that street brat of yours, he got in the way both times. Nathan's hands curled into fists. Derek saw it. He chuckled, enjoyed it. Do you know what it was like, Nathan? Derek continued, voice light but eyes dark. To watch from the sidelines, to see you build this perfect little life. He sneered. Your beautiful wife, your perfect little family, all the things that should have been mine, and you never even wondered where I was. Nathan's voice was ice. I never wondered because you didn't deserve a second thought. Derek's grin sharpened. That's why I want to ruin you. Nathan met his gaze. So you decided to go after my wife, my unborn child. Derek stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Of course. What better way to break you? Nathan felt something primal coil in his chest. For the first time in his life, he wanted to rip something apart with his bare hands. But he didn't, because he wasn't Derek, and because he had already planned how this night would end. Derek's hand moved too fast, reaching for his belt, for the gun at his waist. Nathan didn't flinch, didn't move, and then the warehouse doors burst open, floodlights cut through the darkness. The roar of police sirens filled the space. Men in tactical gear swarmed in, weapons raised, voices sharp as they shouted commands. Derek barely had time to react. Nathan watched as his brother's eyes flickered with realization. You... Derek reached for his gun. Too late. Two officers tackled him from behind, knocking him to the ground. The gun clattered across the floor. Derek snarled, thrashing against them, but the handcuffs snapped into place around his wrists. Nathan stepped forward as Derek was hauled upright, breathing hard, his expression twisted in rage and disbelief. You tipped them off, Derek spat. Nathan's face remained impassive. You left me no choice. Derek's breath came in sharp bursts, his body still straining against the officers holding him. His eyes locked onto Nathan's, and for the first time that night, maybe for the first time in years, he looked desperate, like a man drowning. But then, the desperation was gone, and all that remained was hate. I will ruin you, Derek hissed. Nathan didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't give him the satisfaction. He just watched. Watched as his brother, the man who had once been his own flesh and blood, the man who had chosen revenge over redemption, was dragged away, swallowed by the flashing red and blue lights. And just like that, Derek was gone. The hospital room was unbearably still. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the silence, its rhythm a lifeline tethering Lucas to the waking world. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, and outside the window, dawn was beginning to stretch over the city, painting the sky with soft hues of pale gold and muted lavender. But Laura barely noticed. She hadn't moved from her chair since the doctors had allowed her inside, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. Her hand rested gently over Lucas's, her thumb tracing absent-minded circles over his bruised knuckles. His face was too pale against the stark white pillow, his breaths shallow, his body unnervingly still. Please wake up, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from hours of crying, of pleading, of fear she had never known before. She squeezed his hand, as if her touch alone could pull him back from wherever he had drifted. A twitch. Laura froze. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, that her mind had conjured the movement out of sheer desperation. But then, his fingers curled slightly against hers. Her breath hitched. "Lucas." His eyelids fluttered. Then, after what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes finally opened. Laura choked on a sob, pressing his hand against her forehead, her body sagging with relief. "You scared me," she breathed, laughing through her tears. "You scared me so badly." Lucas, still groggy, blinked at her. His lips parted slightly before curving into the faintest smirk. "Guess I'm harder to get rid of than you thought," he muttered. Laura let out a laugh, a sound half broken, half overwhelmed, her shoulders shaking as she wiped at the wetness on her cheeks. "Of course you are," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Of course you are." At that moment, the door swung open. Nathan stood in the doorway, exhaustion weighing heavy on his features, his tie loosened, his stance stiff, like a man carrying a storm within him. But when his eyes landed on Lucas, awake, breathing, alive, something in him eased. He stepped forward, exhaling slowly. Lucas looked up at him, still blinking the sleep from his eyes. "You look like hell." Nathan let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head. "I could say the same about you." Lucas smirked weakly. "I think I win this round." Nathan sat on the edge of the bed, his expression sobering. "How do you feel?" Lucas hesitated, as if doing a quick scan of his own body. "Like I got hit by a truck." His voice was hoarse, his usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion. "Did I?" Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "Something close to it." Lucas frowned. His gaze flickered to Laura, then back to Nathan. There was a question forming in his eyes, one he hadn't asked yet, but they both knew was coming. "What happened?" Nathan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His expression hardened. "It wasn't me in that van," he said quietly. Lucas's eyes sharpened despite the fatigue. Nathan continued. "It was my brother, Derek." Laura stiffened slightly, but said nothing. Lucas frowned. "You never said you had a brother." Nathan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Because I don't. Not anymore." He hesitated, then told them everything. Told them about Derek, about their father's decision to cut him out, about the years of silence, of distance, of ignoring the possibility that Derek would ever return. And then he told them the rest. "He orchestrated both attacks," Nathan said, his voice cold, controlled. "He wanted to hurt Laura, wanted to take everything from me." Lucas's jaw clenched. Nathan studied him for a moment, then spoke softer this time. "You saved her life." Lucas scoffed, shaking his head. "Didn't do a great job of it." Nathan met his gaze. "You did more than you know." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken weight. Finally, Lucas exhaled, leaning back against the pillows. His eyelids were already growing heavy again, but before sleep could take him, he muttered, "So where is he now?" Nathan's voice was quiet, but firm. "Gone." Lucas didn't press further. His body was already giving in to the exhaustion, his breaths evening out, the painkillers pulling him under. As his eyes closed once more, Laura brushed a hand over his forehead, pressing a gentle kiss to his temple. Nathan stood, stepping closer, watching the boy who had unexpectedly become part of their world. Then, softly, so quietly Laura almost didn't hear it, he murmured, "Thank you, Lucas." The Crawford estate had always been quiet, nestled on the outskirts of the city with its grand architecture and meticulously kept gardens. But now, something about the house felt different, warmer, livelier, as if a shift had taken place, one that none of them had expected, but all of them had embraced. For weeks, Lucas's recovery had dictated the pace of their lives. The once imposing mansion had transformed into a place of whispered conversations, careful steps, and the hushed urgency of doctors' visits. Laura had spent every moment she could at his bedside. Nathan had made fewer appearances at the office, and even Mrs. Holloway had made sure the house remained as peaceful as possible. But now, things were different. Lucas was getting better, and for the first time, he wasn't just healing, he was staying. The afternoon light spilled through the tall windows of the living room, casting golden patterns over the polished floors. Lucas sat curled in the armchair, his legs tucked under him, a book resting on his lap. The bruises on his face had faded to a dull yellow, the cuts along his arms almost gone. His body still ached, but the pain no longer controlled him. Laura sat on the couch across from him, neatly folding tiny baby clothes into soft stacks. The rhythmic motion was soothing, something methodical and grounding. "You still look tired," she murmured, not looking up from the onesie she was folding. Lucas huffed, flipping a page in his book without reading it. "I sleep. You're the one who doesn't." She smirked, smoothing out a small pair of socks. "I have a baby coming, Lucas. Sleep is already a lost cause." Lucas rolled his eyes but said nothing. Before he could respond, Nathan entered the room. His usual crisp attire was slightly undone, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, the top button of his collar unfastened. He carried a leather-bound folder in one hand, and something about the weight of it made Lucas sit up straighter. Nathan's gaze flicked to Laura, then to Lucas, before he stepped forward and set the folder on the coffee table. "What's that?" Lucas asked warily, eyes narrowing. Nathan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then exhaled deeply before taking a seat beside him. Laura placed a gentle hand on Lucas's arm. There was something in her expression, something soft, something deeply emotional. "This makes it official," she murmured. She reached forward and flipped the folder open. Lucas's breath caught. Inside, crisp legal documents were neatly arranged. His name was printed on them. His name, alongside the Crawfords'. His heart slammed against his ribs. He skimmed over the words, his brain trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Petition for adoption. Parental rights. Lucas Crawford. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up at Laura, then Nathan. "You mean," he whispered, the words barely making it past his throat. Nathan sat forward, placing a steady hand on Lucas's shoulder. "You're our son now," he said. Silence stretched in the room, thick and heavy with emotion. Lucas didn't know how to react. His mind raced, trying to process what this meant, what this really meant. He had never belonged anywhere before, never had a real family, never had a last name that meant something. But now, he did. His vision blurred. He hadn't cried in years. Not when he had been cold, not when he had been hungry, not when he had been alone. But this was different. He blinked rapidly, his throat tight, his chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with physical pain. "So, I guess I'm stuck with you guys now, huh?" he managed, trying for a smirk, even as his voice cracked. Laura let out a watery laugh, squeezing his hand. Nathan smirked. "Looks that way." Lucas swallowed, his grip tightening around the papers. Slowly he nodded. "Okay." Months later, the house was filled with a different kind of noise. Tiny cries, soft murmurs, the delicate rustling of blankets. Laura sat propped up in bed, her arms wrapped gently around the newborn she had carried for months. She looked exhausted, but there was a glow in her expression, pure happiness, raw and unfiltered. Lucas hovered near the edge of the room, suddenly unsure of himself. Nathan stood beside Laura, his hand resting lightly on the bed frame. "Lucas," Laura whispered, shifting slightly. "Do you want to hold her?" Lucas's eyes widened. He looked between Laura and Nathan, then back at the small bundle nestled in her arms. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Laura smiled. "You're her big brother now." Nathan nodded, his approval silent but firm. Lucas hesitated, then stepped forward. Laura carefully passed the baby to him. She was impossibly small, warm, fragile in a way Lucas had never held before. For a moment, he held his breath, afraid he'd do something wrong. Then, as if sensing his nerves, Amy stirred slightly, her tiny fingers curling against his chest. Lucas exhaled. He looked down at her, something indescribable settling in his chest. Something whole. Nathan watched them in silence, his gaze unreadable. And then softly, so softly Lucas almost didn't hear it, Nathan murmured, "Welcome home, kid." Lucas blinked, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had one. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining.